Y'all waiting for something? Oh, yeah, I guess we are. Okay, we're here. Okay. All right, well, hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming. My name is Scott Aiges. I'm with the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Foundation, which is thrilled to present tonight's Dent Congo Square Symposium here at the Old U.S. Mint. We want to thank the Mint and all the staff here and everyone from the Louisiana State Museum for hosting us. And also thank our colleagues with the Lower Ninth Ward Center for Sustainable Engagement and Development for their support of tonight's event as well. Just a couple of quick words of introduction, and then we will get on with tonight's main event. So tonight is part of the Jazz and Heritage Foundation's, and you're all familiar with the Jazz and Heritage Foundation, I assume, which, as you know, is the nonprofit organization that owns the Jazz Fest. Our role is not to produce the festival. That's done by Quint Davis and his staff at Festival Productions Incorporated, which is actually a separate company, but we're thrilled to have them do such a great job. And our role is to use the proceeds from Jazz Fest for year-round programs in the areas of education, economic development, and cultural enrichment. And one of our programs is the Dent Congo Square Lecture Series and Symposiums. I'm sure many of you here knew Tom. He was an amazing guy, an author, a journalist, a poet, playwright, activist, and he was also an early executive director of the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Foundation. And he was the one that started the Congo Square Lecture Series, and when he passed away, the series was named in his honor. It's called the Congo Square Lecture Series. And in the past, we have done a number of programs and events that explore the cultural legacy of the African diaspora and how those are resonated and reflected through Congo Square. Last time we did one of these events, which was last November, we changed gears a bit, and we, instead of talking about culture and cultural history, we started talking about current events. And that event was about real estate development in the Treme, and it was so well received, we decided to continue talking about current events, and that led to tonight, the decision to do tonight's forum on the subject of culture and regulation. And of course, we all know the history of Congo Square, and it goes without saying that that may very well be the earliest example in this country of regulation of culture, you could say. And in the time since we decided to do tonight's event, there have been a number of news reports that I'm sure you're all familiar with that talked about some of the issues surrounding the way we manage culture and the way in which we regulate cultural expression in the current environment. And tonight's symposium was inspired by some of that news coverage and some of those events, but it's not about that. What we are really here to do is to learn from other folks, from other cities, and to find out how other cities are dealing with very similar issues that we deal with here in New Orleans. Now, some of you may have noticed that when the discussion of culture and cultural regulation, cultural expression, noise ordinances, the Buku Music Festival, whatever it may be, when those issues come up, there tends to be just a little bit of polarization, perhaps, and maybe a little bit of rancor in the air. Well, we are looking to try to cross the divide and come up with some common ground and have a reasonable discussion that we can all relate to, so that those who may possibly be at odds on certain issues can realize that we all live in the same city and we all have to figure out ways to get along over the long term. So instead of talking at one another tonight, we are here to listen to people who have been there and have done that for a long time. And we have a very distinguished group of folks who have come, some of whom from very far away, to come and speak to us tonight. And they have spent lifetimes working on many of these issues. And so we're really here to hear what they have to say. And so our job tonight is to turn down the heat and instead shed some light on how we can all manage to express our culture and still sleep at night and get along. Just a quick word about my own experience with some of these issues and my own perspective on this. Some of you may know that in an earlier life, I worked for the newspaper here in town. And I really started paying attention to these types of issues back in the early 90s when I wrote extensively about some controversy that was happening at the time about the bar in Treme called Little People's Place. And later, in yet a different lifetime, when I went to work in City Hall, I had a little bit of experience in dealing with the issues of creating the cultural overlay district that was successfully established for Frenchman Street and the one that was not successfully established for North Rampart Street. As you know, one of them passed, one of them didn't, and even so, we still continue to have issues and challenges relating to the way entertainment, live entertainment, music, noise, parking, litter, all of the things that go along with it are dealt with. When I was working in City Hall, and we were interested in trying to establish a cultural overlay district for North Rampart Street, one of the things that we heard very loudly from a number of the organizations representing residents of the French Quarter was something along the lines of, okay, mayor's office, you say that you are able to control the noise coming from jazz clubs on Rampart Street, even if it's done in an unamplified way, but why should we trust you? Because we live in the French Quarter and have dealt with the noise coming from Bourbon Street for decades, and even though there are perfectly decent regulations on the books, you all don't seem to have much interest in enforcing those noise ordinances. So why should we acquiesce now and allow you to legalize the music that was already happening on Rampart Street? And to be honest with you, I didn't have a good comeback for that. That was pretty hard to argue with. When we then went down to Bourbon Street and really saw what was going on and did walks with the police and saw that you had bars and t-shirt shops and daiquiri stands with loudspeakers placed in the windows and in the door jambs, and Councilwoman Palmer can tell you more about how that's being dealt with. I mean, it was just crazy. It was just crazy, and there was really no need for it. And so it became quite apparent that here in New Orleans, we are sometimes really good about establishing what seem like reasonable regulations and rules that we think we can live with. But when it comes to the enforcement side, that tends to be a little bit more of an issue. And when it comes to enforcement, there's a totally different subject that I came across that strikes me as relevant somehow. Back in an earlier day when I was writing for the newspaper, I had the occasion to write a story about the New Orleans Rum Distillery, which, as you may know, was the first distillery to happen in New Orleans for a very, very long time. So I thought it'd be interesting to do a little bit of research on the history of rum distillation in New Orleans. So I went to the public library and looked through the microfiches, through newspaper accounts of rum distilling as far back as I could go. And the thing that I remember most about that particular exercise was reading that in, I believe it was 1790, the governor of Louisiana established a prohibition on the distillation of rum within the city boundaries of New Orleans, I guess because distilleries have an unfortunate tendency to do things like, I don't know, explode or set things on fire. And so that was fine. They established a prohibition. And then in 1830, the then governor of Louisiana also enacted a prohibition on having rum distilleries in New Orleans. And then again in 1870, they prohibited rum distillation, and again in 1890, and in 1901. So as you can see, every once in a while, they find a need to come along and enact a regulation, and then they forget about it and go along with business as usual. So enforcement tends to be something of an issue that we have to contend with. But it is possible. There are plenty of examples around the world of places that are able to enjoy their cultural expression and their lifestyles and also maintain very pleasant quality of life for those folks who live there. And we can do it. We can totally do this. We can still be crazy, kooky, funky New Orleans, and we can still raise families here. And I'll give you one other anecdote that I often think of and tell people when I get into conversations on this subject. Once upon a time, this was probably in, when was it? In the late 1990s, maybe early 2000s. I had the occasion to go on a business trip to Amsterdam, one of my favorite cities, which, as we all know, has a really well-deserved reputation for being able to regulate certain things. Levies, I'm talking about levies. They're able to regulate levies. And coffee. They're able to regulate coffee very well. So I'm in Amsterdam for what was actually a music industry conference, and who should be in town playing that week but the Radiators? So of course, I had to go check out the hometown band. And they were playing in a very small club, smaller than this room. And they were playing through what I can only describe as a PA system that was built for Madison Square Garden. It was ear-splittingly loud, unbelievably loud in the room. So at a certain point, I just kind of had to walk outside and get a little fresh air. And I looked around and noticed that I was standing in the middle of a residential block with apartment buildings on all sides of me, and I could not hear a single sound coming from the club. And it was then that I started noticing that every music venue that I went to that entire week all had double sets of doors. And there were people making sure that when a person walked in, one set of doors closed before the other set opened. And I think about this all the time because it is entirely possible to have reasonable solutions to problems that we somehow still feel a need to argue about. And I just find that amusing. Another thing that I find amusing is that the last time I was in this room, actually, I had the honor of being presented with an award, if you can believe that or not, as Concert Promoter of the Year. And yet here I am, and I'm sure there are a few people in this room that are mad at me for some of the noise that we generate with some of these concerts, like one that we did a couple of weeks ago in Armstrong Park. And some of you may know that there were actually a number of folks that thought that the music that we were playing from brass bands and others was indeed too loud. And we took very careful measures to try to make sure that we didn't overstep our bounds, as it were, with the volume of the music, but we didn't satisfy everyone. And I want to give a special note of thanks to someone who I'm sure you all know, Mr. Leo Watermeyer, who I believe is here this evening. Leo, you came up with a solution to the problem. And because of your solution, we are at our next event in Armstrong Park, which is the Treme Creole Gumbo Festival, which is in November 8th and 9th, I believe. We're going to deploy the sound system that you suggested we use, which instead of a massive PA system built for Madison Square Garden at the front of the stage, trying to project one volume for the people who are 10 feet in front of the stage and people who are 100 yards from the stage, we're going to do what you suggested, which is place small speakers around the perimeter of the square and use what's essentially the outdoor equivalent of a home stereo surround sound system. So Leo, thank you for your suggestion. We really appreciate it. It was a great solution. And now I have a request for you. Please buy some Jazz Fest tickets, because that's what we're going to use to pay for the PA system. So my point, obviously, is we can make this work. We can, if we listen to one another, we can find ways to have a rational conversation and to find solutions that can work for all concerned, which is really what we are trying to do. So what we want to do is turn down the noise and listen. And so, with that, I want to just tell you very quickly how tonight is going to go. We are going to have a series of speakers, starting with Councilmember Palmer and going through everyone else who has been invited to come and speak. They will each take the podium for about 15 minutes, and they will speak in succession. After that, there will be something of a roundtable where they will come up to the dais and we will engage in a dialogue, and that will be the time for audience participation and questions. And then when it gets to be 9 o'clock, whether we're finished or not, we're leaving. Because this is a public facility, and the folks who work here at the Mint were told that we would finish at 9, and that is what we're going to do. And if you really want to continue the conversation, the after party is going to be at Mojitos across the street. So we'll see you there for a margarita. So that is what I have to say. So thank you all so much for being here and for coming. And with that, I would like to adjust the screen here real quick and bring up, if I can find it, Councilmember Palmer's presentation and ask that she join us here and tell you what she came to talk about, which is really cool. Okay, I think we're going.